Camille Cheng, welcome to the Process podcast.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. Had training this morning and today's our afternoon off. So I'm happy to be here today.
Camille, okay, this is going to be my express version of your introduction.
Okay.
And when I say express version, I'm going to go down like the athlete Camille route. So you've been to 3 Asian Games.
Mm-hmm.
You've been to 2 Olympics.
Yes.
You're preparing for your 3rd Olympics in Paris.
Yep.
You've won 7 Asian Games gold medals.
Not gold.
Did I just say gold?
Yes, but it's okay.
Okay, 7 medals.
Yes.
I even did my research on that. There's 1 silver, more than 1 silver?
No, 1 silver and the rest are all bronze.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, so that's taken care of swimmer performance like Camille. Other than that, who are you and what do you do?
So yes, swimmer. I am also a co-founder of a mental health charity, Mind the Waves. I always feel like this question's so intimidating. The easy answer is always like Olympian and now co-founder. So let's just go with that for now.
Okay, but I actually do love diving into that question
Okay,
because I find
yeah.
it a very hard question to answer as well.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
I always feel like the way I should answer it is like I'm going to start with my occupation,
Yes. Yeah.
but then I'm like, well, what if that occupation changes?
Mm-hmm.
You know, who am I and how do I describe myself? So when you say it's a hard and intimidating question, like what are you wrestling with?
I think it's the identity question of, I think, yes, it's so easy to be like, yes, you're a swimmer. And I think one of the big things that I've been working on personally and also sharing with, the communities that I'm part of is not that I'm not just an athlete, but I'm more than an athlete. I have other interests. It could be anything from the cultural backgrounds that I grew up with, to being a swimmer, to what I studied, psychology, to the passion projects that I'm involved in now. And I think all of these make up who I am. And I feel like that's really hard to, put in a few words. So the easy answer is always Olympian. And yeah.
Okay, so can I ask, was there a catalyst that made you start thinking about the way that you introduce yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Was there something where you were like, maybe actually I shouldn't pour so much into this identity of being a swimmer, I need to explore other ways?
Yeah. Well, I think initially when I was younger, the struggle was more around cultural identity. Like I was born in Hong Kong, then I moved to Beijing. My mom's French, my dad's Chinese, studied in the US, came back to Hong Kong. And, it's when I applied to universities, the personal statement was talking about that, growing up in a multicultural background and what's home. When people ask you, where are you from? How do you answer that very simply? And then I think when I really started becoming a higher level athlete, that became such a big part of my identity. And it was really, I think, this big aha moment on like questioning these labels that we have after Rio Olympics. So I went to Rio and then just like, after one race, all of a sudden you're now an Olympian. And with that title, there comes so much more, when you say I'm an Olympian, people react very differently. And I felt like, but I haven't really changed, but how I'm perceived has changed a lot. And I didn't really know how to, I guess, handle a lot of that. Maybe some of it was self-imposed, but I felt like all of a sudden I always had to perform at this high level, Olympic level, every single competition. I felt like people were now coming to me, asking me for all sorts of advice. And I was like, I don't have all the answers. And I think after Rio, I was thinking maybe, just one Olympics and then I'll retire. I never thought that I could be a professional athlete. Like that was not even like a job or a career that I thought of, as I was growing up as a possibility. And after the Rio, after that high, the post-Olympic slump, and I came back and I just really needed a break, mentally, physically, emotionally. And I just started asking myself so many questions, if I retired now, what am I going to do? Who am I if I'm not an athlete? What are my strengths? What are my interests? Because I've spent all these years just so focused on this one goal. And you have, 2-3 weeks, amazing that you're fulfilling this dream that I've had for so long. And then it's like, what's next. And I think that's something I really struggled with because I didn't really have a lot of support, or maybe I didn't know who to go to for that support. And just grappling with all these questions, I think I was like, okay, if I decide to keep going in this sport, I really need to spend time like getting to know who I am beyond the athlete. And I think a lot of it has changed too with the culture within athletes. A lot more athletes are talking about that, that they're, more than an athlete, or um, so I think that's kind of, to answer your question, maybe around then that I started thinking about that.
Was a part of, I guess I'm trying to envision like the young you doing your first Olympics,
Hmm.
and then you have this label literally after doing your first race, like you said, now you're an Olympian,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's media and there's
Hmm.
press and there's just the world knowing about that. I'm
Hmm.
sure a lot of us can't even comprehend the questions and the expectations that come with that. But was also, did you have a part to play in that as well? Did you also did you look forward to the day that you're going to finish your first Olympic race and be able to say like, I'm now an Olympian? Was that something that ever like, was that something that ever motivated you, or was something in the back of your mind? Or was that literally just almost like fame that was just thrust upon you, even not that you wanted it?
I think I was a bit older, I would say, like if you compare to maybe with the, swimming world. I was 20, how old was I? 20, I can't even do math, 23 at my
Mm,
first Olympics, which I would say is a bit older to in the swimming world. And so I think the identity of being an Olympian and a swimmer and a professional athlete hit me much later. Like when I was young, swimming to me was just like fun, passion. Let's see how far you can push yourself. Let's see how far this sport can take you. And, I walked onto a team in university surrounded by Olympians, Olympic medalists, Olympic coaches. I was like, what am I doing here? Um, and so for me, it was never really to attain that status or, to have that name, but it was really for the experience and really to see, like, can I push myself and be at the highest level I can in my sport? And I think I didn't really know what it meant to be a professional athlete because up until that point, it was really my first year as a professional athlete that I also went to the Olympics. Before then, I was like an amateur athlete. So everything was a lot more fun. I was part of a collegiate team. I didn't have to deal with, financial support depending on that your performance equated to how much funding you're getting, dealing with, like you said, the media and expectations on like always having to respond after every single race of like, and how did that feel? I'm like, if you have a bad race, um, and they like have a microphone there and I'm just like, oh, I haven't even processed it and I'm supposed to answer right then and there. So I think all these things just came very quickly for me and I didn't really, nobody teaches you how to handle that. And so that was a bit challenging, I would say.
what's interesting is I'm thinking about my own
Hmm.
like sporting career, and actually mine was almost completely opposite to
Yeah.
yours. I had like, to be honest, like as a young player who'd like been touted was going to
Mm,
have a really good career. You could be playing in the Hong Kong Sevens. You could be doing X, Y, and Z for the rest of your life. I actually never really like loved it that much.
mm,
It was
mhm,
more that it was like the rest of the world was telling me you should do this because you're good at it.
mhm,
Honestly, I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll do it. But there was never the love and the enjoyment that I had from that I had when I was at younger ages.
mhm,
I was
mhm.
kind of going through like, it was teenage years. I was like, this isn't cool to be an athlete. Like all my friends are out partying,
Yeah.
drinking. I want to be doing that actually, to be honest.
Mhm,
But how cool would it be if I could just say that I was a professional rugby player?
mhm,
And as a Hong Kong kid, like the pinnacle of Hong Kong rugby is like playing in a Hong Kong stadium,
mhm.
40,000
Yeah.
people represent your country.
Mhm,
And so for me, so much of my motivation in pursuing professional rugby was that I just want to tick that box. And I
mhm,
want to be able to say I played in the Hong Kong
mhm,
Sevens. And I had like lots of years where I came really close, got injured, the last minute. And it was like the thing that the reason I kept on coming back from injuries, which I probably shouldn't
mm,
have, was because I haven't ticked that box yet. And
mhm,
I almost want that label. And I think for you, it wasn't like that. The label
Mhm.
just kind of got whacked on you, and then
Mhm.
you had to deal with it. Whereas
Mhm.
for me, I was like, give me the label. I
Yeah.
want that life now.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until transitioning out of rugby and then moving into a new career where
Mhm.
I'm now a coach and I want to be the best coach possible
Mhm.
and a business owner. Not that I cared about that, but it was really, I want to be the coach,
Mhm.
where that label now hung around, and I felt like it hampered me transitioning to my next career.
Yeah.
I'd poured so much into the label and the identity. I'd become so attached to it
Mhm.
and had so much pride in telling people that I was a Hong Kong Sevens rugby player and
Mhm.
this was my job, that I then like started resenting it actually as I
Mhm.
came into coaching, and was like, no, I'm not it was like, oh, you're Ed Haynes, you're the Hong Kong rugby player. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that
Yeah.
before. That was, that was a few years ago, but
Mhm.
no, I don't do that anymore. They
Mhm.
were kind of like, oh.
Yeah.
And I'm like, actually, this is partly my
Mhm.
own doing, and how much I attached my identity to that. But at the same time, it's not their fault that
Mhm.
they're putting that label on me. Like, that's what
Yeah.
the world is looking for, labels to find
Yeah.
it easier to classify
Yeah.
us. So it's interesting hearing your story and how opposite it is
Mhm.
to mine.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you were speaking, it's just, it is funny. I think I've come to really, I struggle with embracing being an Olympian. I
Mm,
think that's a big thing. It was, you know, especially after the first one and I came back to Hong Kong, and, whenever I met somebody and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was always like, "Oh, I swim." They're like, "Oh," like, wanting to get more. And it'd be like, 5 minutes into the conversation, they'd be like, "Oh, so like, are you trying to go to the Olympics?" And I was like, "Oh, actually, I've been." And then I was like, "Why am I constantly, maybe it's cultural, like be humble, don't brag." And then I was thinking like, but if I continue to, you know, play it down, I'm doing a disservice to myself. And so I've really, in the first few years after my first Olympics, I was really trying to find that balance on like, how do I really embrace what I'm doing? And I think what helped me a lot actually was a lot of these like community things that I was doing. After I was invited a lot more to do swim clinics or to do talks. And I realized like by sharing my experiences and my stories, actually it resonated with a lot of people. And I think I've always taken an approach to really wanting to share like the authentic experience as an athlete. So I didn't shy away from talking about the downs a lot, because I think most of the time people, like you said, they see you on TV, they see that you're an Olympian, they see the medals, and those are all amazing things, but they don't see the other days where it's really hard, where you have to motivate yourself to get up, get in the pool when you don't want to, when you're dealing with plateaus in performance, or, I'm sure you've had your fair share of injuries. And so I think there's so much that I've learned about myself around those lows, like how do you bounce back, resilience, all these things that sport teaches us. And I think when I've been able to talk about it more, it was so it was received with thank you so much for sharing, like I'm struggling with, this or that. And it's not necessarily the same context, the same situation, but it's the same feelings and emotions that come up. I'm really stressed. I don't know how to deal with pressure from my parents or from the teachers. And so I thought that, if I can use my voice and my platform, to talk about these and it helps other people or people can feel connected, then I feel like that's been something that I feel like really privileged to be able to do. And I think that really helped me find like joy in what I was doing again. I think swimming for me from the very beginning was all about like loving being in the water. And over the years, when you attach all these things, the Olympian, you have to perform because of your funding or all of this, it's like I lost sight a little bit of like, why am I still doing this? And so really trying to go back to like the why do I want to do this? And of course there's a performance piece that I want to do well, and I'm still chasing, wanting to get better every day. But I think it's become less about competing against other people, but really competing against myself. And that's been the biggest challenge too, as I've gotten older and, more years in the sport, is the comparison, not to others, but to my previous self. And that's something like very, very recently I've been really struggling with. We talked about like identity, and just like even within swimming, the identity, I'm a freestyler, and my first Olympics, I qualified in the 200-meter freestyle. And that was, that was like my baby. I'm like, I am a 200 freestyler. And, after the Olympics, I really struggled. I was like, I don't want to swim this event. It's just too mentally challenging. Like, I felt like physically it was going to hurt too much. And I just took a break from it. And then the last few years, I'm like, I want to bring it back. And I've really, you were saying about attached, like I was so attached to this identity as I'm a 200 freestyler. Like I've had a very hard time to let it go. And it really wasn't until maybe a month ago that I was like, why am I still so attached to this? And I think I realized that, that was me at that point. I was a 200 freestyler. It doesn't take away, if I'm not anymore today, it doesn't take away from the fact that I did do that. And it's okay to evolve. And sometimes it's, life happens and you're at a different stage. And I feel like that's really helped me now kind of reframe my mindset and my goals for this summer. And yeah, I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
going
it's
on a
like,
bunch of tangents.
no, but I resonate a lot with the
Mhm.
last piece. It's
Yeah.
like, every season of life demands a new version of ourselves.
Yes.
And I think when you're still in the same discipline, it's very hard
So hard.
not to compare 2016 Camille
Yeah.
with 2024 Camille,
Yeah.
because you're still at the event is still the same. And
Yeah.
2016 Camille, who probably attached so much of her worth to the time,
Yep.
and her finishing times and her personal best, to maybe the Camille now who doesn't have that same attachment, but also knowing that the rest of the world's probably going to be looking at you
Yeah.
and how you're progressing as an athlete, which is, at the end of the day, they don't care about potentially how spiritual you become,
Yes.
or how mentally you developed,
Yep.
or how well you can control your emotions. At the end of the day, it's a time.
Yep.
And that's what defines how good Camille is as a swimmer. So I can totally understand how that is something that's really hard to wrestle with, but it's also really cool to hear that you are asking those questions and trying to deconstruct the Camille of the past. Not there's anything wrong with that Camille, but it's just, how can you still do the same thing but not carry the same burden, weight, struggle, anxieties, all that kind of stuff. You said a lot of really good things in that tangent. I think one is like your sharing of your story. I don't know if you feel the same way, but what I have found, I mean, like, vulnerability, I think, is super powerful. Like, it's one of our values that we have on our wall that we always talk about as a team. As a guy, it's something that's been, it was not a part of my DNA or my, my upbringing. And, I was someone who's very good at like just bottling up my feelings and sweeping under the rug. When I read my first book that talks about the idea of vulnerability, and this is not that long ago, I'm talking about maybe 8 years ago, and I like first started to dabble with it. I started to dabble with like my closest friends to share how I was feeling, what I'm struggling with, ask for help. And then I felt how good that felt and how like freeing and liberating it was. Then it was like, okay, who's the next? Who can I now open up to? And then it was like the team, and then it was family, and then it was like, oh, do I dare take this to social media, like a platform where anyone can see it? I'm like, yeah, why not? Let's put it on there. Then it was a podcast. Then it's like, I'm at a point now where I can talk, I feel I can talk about anything and feel no fear about judgment or what people might think. But what I've also found is I almost feel like it feels like therapy every time I do share. And I don't know what you think about this, but one of the big things that motivates me to keep on sharing so openly about the wins and the struggles and everything in between is, number one, like you said, like, you just never know who you might be helping. And I'm a coach because yeah, I feel like the thing that I want to do in my life more than anything else help people. So
Mm-hmm.
that is just a natural draw for me that keeps me coming back. But then the selfish part of it is that I feel I level up as a human
Mm-hmm.
being every time I do. Like I
Mm-hmm.
get more language, just hearing
Yeah.
other people talk
Mm-hmm.
about their struggles and explaining it in their own way. I feel like I can better grasp my own challenges and
Mm-hmm.
my own struggles because I have more words and language and feelings to be able to express those things. Has that been something that you've experienced as well?
Yeah, I think like I've always been very fascinated in like I studied psychology, so just like
And actually,
how
I'll just to
yeah,
pause you there. Is your own journey with all this that you just been sharing,
yeah.
is that what drove you to study psychology, or has that interest
I
always
think
been
it's
there?
it's always been there, but then being in such a physical sport, but then a lot of the things I was struggling with were mainly like mental things, confidence, trust, like you can work really hard and you can, but if you don't feel confident or you don't trust yourself, that I just feel like it's not going to reflect in the performance. And I think in Rio, that's something that I struggled with. Like I was probably in the best shape at that point, and I was, in practices hitting everything, all the target times and everything. But when I got on the block, there was this like mental block of I don't feel like I fully belong on this Olympic stage. Like it felt very much like I'm here, they're all Olympians. I just hadn't, like I said, really embraced that. And so I was like, okay, another reason why I was like, okay, let's keep going was like, I haven't fully unlocked everything.
Mm.
And it might not be because of time. So, as we were saying, I mean, kind of going off on tangents, but people now, a lot of people ask me, like, why are you still swimming? If I haven't gone a best time in 5, 6 years, and it is a performance based sport, why am I swimming? And I think now I'm fine because I don't feel like I have to justify because I know why I'm swimming. But in the beginning, it was hard not to let other people's, especially when it's like family and close people are like, why are you swimming?
So
You've already,
how do you answer that now?
I mean, I feel like for me, it's not I think of swimming as like an education. And I feel like there's still so much for me to learn from this sport. And I think physically, I've qualified for an Olympics 2, hopefully 3. And so the physical piece, I feel like I have mastered it for myself. And but there still feels like there was unfinished business mentally, like I hadn't
Mm.
unlocked everything. And of course, at some point I'm going to have to stop swimming and there'll be something else. But I still feel like there's so much that this sport can teach me. And I don't feel like I fully um, have gotten everything yet. And I also feel like I want to end swimming on my own terms. There's so many times I could have stopped, injuries, other people's expectations or voices. And I'm like, I've been doing this sport for over 20 years. Like, if I'm coming to an end, like, it has to be on my terms because I don't want, you know, any regrets of, I could have or I should have. Yeah. And so I feel like I'm getting to this point where I'm happy with and like really being happy with what I've done. And I think a big thing is not rushing to the next thing and really like taking the time to celebrate, the things that I've done and the progress and the journey. Um, so that's been, a big piece of it. And as you were asking about the language and being vulnerable, I think a big part of it was actually when I was my time in the US. We actually watched this video by Brene Brown. It's about vulnerability. I
Yeah.
forgot the title of it, but anyways, and
Was
it's
she
like
when she's on stage?
yes, at a TED Talk.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I
I want to say
remember.
it's like the power of vulnerability, but I could be wrong.
So courage over comfort is 100% stolen from Brene
Yeah.
Brown, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah,
If there's one person I would love to meet, it's her.
yeah, she's awesome.
So anyways, I remember that, and I think so for me it was okay being vulnerable, and I think especially coming back to Asia, having already been in a kind of community or team where it was a lot more open and talking about, emotions and feelings and all of that. I was quite shocked, like, oh, nobody here talks about how they're feeling. And so I've started, I was like, okay, well, start with yourself. And I found that like when you open up, then people feel more comfortable opening up. And like you said, first with your friends and then the next layer and then the next layer is social media. And I feel like now I'm, very comfortable, I would say, talking about it. Um, and, I know it's still very taboo and there's still a lot of stigma, but I think it starts with people, slowly, more and more people talking about it.
Yeah, and I do find that the relationships that come from
Mhm.
like vulnerability experiences, when there's a sharing and a receiving and then a sharing back,
Yeah.
it's like relationships just go deeper than,
Yes.
and you're like, oh my god, how have I never experienced this
Mhm.
before?
Yeah.
But I think I'm gonna go back to your answer
Yep.
and how you respond to people when they ask you why you keep on swimming. I think
Mhm.
that's a
Yeah.
really, really nice way to put it. And
Mhm.
actually, I was reflecting a bit on myself, and like that again, I've just taken language from the way that you've talked
Mhm.
about it that
Mhm.
I'm probably going to use in
Yeah.
my journey. So I think what you're saying there is that sport is a catalyst right now for helping you
Mhm.
develop as a person.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily that sport is teaching you lessons in sport,
Yep.
to be a better athlete, but it's teaching you lessons on life. And I
Yep.
think probably right now it sounds like the life lessons are very much mentally
Mhm.
in things that are kind of going on in your head,
Yeah.
less about the physical.
Yeah.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
really a really nice way to put it. And it's
Mhm.
why I think people ask me the same question as
Mhm.
well. It's like, Ed, you're old as fuck and you've been doing CrossFit for so long. You've had like 100 operations.
Mm.
Why do you still do the
Yeah.
CrossFit Open? I'm like, every time I do it, I learn something new about myself.
Yeah.
It upgrades my prescription of coaching because I'm doing the same thing that I'm putting all
Mhm.
my athletes
Yep.
through.
Yeah.
And like doing hard shit, like it's important to do.
Mhm.
And when we don't do hard things, like it's not to say that hard is really important. Like it's not
Yeah.
about hustle mentality.
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
not a
Yeah.
buyer into that necessarily, but that a lot of good things come from doing hard things,
Yep.
whether you're successful or you fall
Mhm.
short. So yeah, I love that answer.
Mhm.
Um, have you always, was being an Olympian always like a dream of yours? A lot of people, professional athletes and Olympians, when they talk about, their path to being an
Mhm.
Olympian, it was like, I just knew when I
Yeah.
was 3 years old that I was going to be an Olympian. I had the Olympic rings like painted on
Me
my wall. Was that you?
I don't think so. I think, well, yes and no. I think I was, I just loved being in the water. And I think very early ages, like swimming to me was like something that really helped with my confidence more than anything. I was really shy as a young girl. And I remember like swimming and being good at this. It just like boosted my confidence. I was more confident in school, like socially. And I was actually living in Beijing during the Beijing Olympics. And so, loved swimming. I got tickets, I watched. And I think that was the first time that I was like, wow, it would be so cool one day to be on the other side, not a spectator, but actually race amongst the best. And, of course, I kept this to myself. I didn't tell anybody. And I think a big thing was, that fear of being like, I want to go to the Olympics and then n- not going and then like being like, oh my God, everyone is judging me. Like I wanted to go and then I missed it. I was
So it's
always
best to just keep it to
right.
yourself, right?
And I remember when I went to the US and then I was surrounded, like I was saying, Olympic medalist here, Olympic medalist there, like Olympic coach. And I was just, what am I doing here? And at first I was like, it's too much. I don't feel like I belong. And then I was like, okay, well, if I'm amongst the best, I can only get better. So let's, be like a sponge and just like absorb as much as you can. And so I think in those years, I really started to be like, oh my gosh, maybe I actually can reach this goal. And I remember having a conversation with my coach at the time, being like, I might want to go to the Olympics for Hong Kong. And she just very bluntly was like, well, you're going to need to do a lot more than this. So I was like, okay. She didn't say no, but she was like, I'm like, okay, let's try. And I think it wasn't until like I would say I had probably like my breakthrough summer in 2014. Um and then I think it's just like with everything, every race, every training, you're just building confidence. And so I graduated in 2015, so I had a year before Rio and I was like, "You know what? I've been swimming so long. Let's just give it 1 year, like fully embrace it." Because and if it means like saying it out loud, like just overcome that fear. And actually I was like, oh, I don't know why I was so scared, because the second I told people, everyone was like, I'm going to hold you accountable. And that meant they were challenging me if I was, not doing my part, but they were always encouraging me and supporting me. And I think really that's where, people think swimming is an individual sport, but really it takes a whole team behind you to get you there. And I think when I embraced being like, okay, I'm going to go for the Olympics, it was a little bit like I acted as if I already was, and then I was like, okay, the worst thing is I don't, but at least I tried. The worst thing would be like not even trying, because I'm so scared of what other people would think. So I think that then that was and then I qualified in actually end of 2015, and there were obviously a lot of ups and downs. Like I was like, oh, I'm training so well, but I'm not getting this time. And at that, you're swimming against a time standard. And a lot of mental struggles around, especially the language that we use to talk to ourselves. I was like, I need to make this. I should be, I have to. And actually I remember my coach was like, okay, like everything went wrong at this meet. I showed up 30 minutes before my race. I barely warmed up. Just everything, as athletes, you have your routines, just everything out the window. And I was like, okay. And she's like, just swim for the little girl that fell in love with the sport. I was like, okay, I can do that. And it was really much like you talk about flow state. I don't even really remember that race. I just remember touching the wall, looking up, seeing my time. I think I was like 6th place in my heat. And like my whole team was cheering so loudly, like as if I had won. And I was like, it's better I qualified for the Olympics. And I think then I just realized, there was a lot of fear of just like wanting to achieve this goal. And I think the worst thing would have just been to not even try.
There's something very admirable about people when they just state, like no matter how audacious it is.
Yeah.
And I think what I find admirable about it is because I was probably the person that you're talking about, which was like, I was a bit afraid to state really like audacious goals.
Yeah.
And maybe even not even have audacious goals in my own, even in my own head, just play the safe game because, and this all stems from a fear of failure.
Yeah.
That's been a big part of me from, ever since I can remember. And so, I think people who struggle with or have a fear of failure tend to set easy goals. So they reduce the likelihood of ever falling short on something. But every time I'd hear someone just say something that seems so outrageous, I was always just like, that's so awesome.
I know.
You can just say it. And no part, like, I just want you to be successful now. Like, and so I'm sure you experience that in just saying this goal out loud. I wanted to quickly interrupt this episode with a quick shout out to our sponsors, Today Well Spent. I've been using this journal for 2 years and it has made a massive impact on my physical, but mostly my mental well-being. It is a guided journal backed by neuro and behavioral science, which I actually didn't know at the time. It has questions for you to answer at the start of the day, at the end of the day, end of every week, end of every month. And it's brought so much self-awareness to me of the things that positively and negatively impact my life. So if you're someone who cares about your physical and your mental well-being, which I think you do because you listen to this podcast, then go and grab yourself a Today Well Spent. Use the discount code THEPROCESS, one word in capitals, to get your discount. But I want to ask you about that year, that breakthrough year that you had, because it sounds like you probably put your chips a bit more into one basket in trying to attain this goal. But I think this is something that, I speak to athletes a lot about. Maybe right now it's more in the sport of CrossFit. So people who are kind of like bubble athletes, right? They want to crack it to the very top and they've gotten close lots of times. And they have this this epiphany where they're like, I need to go all in. If I want to do this, I want to go all in. And that can go like very different ways. It can sometimes they go so all in their own eyes, which means like sacrificing a lot of their other joys of life, social interactions, hanging out with friends, going on holidays, and they become so laser focused on the thing, whatever the thing is. And I'm sure a big part of that is being so laser focused on the outcome of achieving whatever versus, really diving into the process. And it ends up going horribly badly. for them. So they come out of the year of going all in and they end up
Yeah.
worse than they started. So what happened for you in that year that allowed you to suddenly unlock a new level of performance and then eventually qualify to the Olympics?
Yeah, really good question. I think that's the thing that I try to talk about more now is like really importance of balance. And I've experienced what you're talking about many times.
Me
Like,
too.
when you're, especially like a big competition's coming up and you're just like laser focused, like all you can think about is a race. And I realized like every time I'd get to the race, I was so exhausted because I'd actually been like rehearsing the race, like 1,000 times up to that point. And, the body thinks you've actually swam that race 1,000 times. So obviously you're exhausted. And I think for me, like in swimming, we have a term like happy swimmer, fast swimmer. And
Yes.
I just think when I look back on the times that I've performed the best mentally, emotionally, I was just really, obviously physically in shape, but I was always very happy, very confident. And that happiness and confidence doesn't always come from like how you're training. It could be about other things outside of your life that are filling your well. And a lot of it is the support group that you're, the people that you're surrounded with. I think sometimes it's very important to have something that you can check out of your sport. People always ask like, how many times a day do you train? And it's like, okay, maybe I train 4 to 6 hours a day, but it's really a lifestyle because you have to recover, then you have to sleep, and like you were talking about, sacrifice. But it's also carving out time as part of your training to like not think about anything related to your training. Because I think what I struggled with is if it's the whole year only swimming, it's just there's no time for like to breathe almost. And I've always felt like when I had something else, it just made me more present when I was training. It made me more like appreciate what I was doing. So I think that's really important, is to kind of, and honestly, I think that COVID taught a lot of athletes that you don't need to overtrain or like overly focus. I think big thing is training smarter and training more efficiently, and like rest, breaks. That's always very important. And the breaks don't have to be like physical breaks, but mental breaks as well.
I think just the whole idea of just being present.
Yeah.
Right. So when it's time to swim or do the thing, then you're fully
Yeah.
immersed in doing that thing. And then when you're not doing the thing, your brain to be doing whatever the thing that you're doing, if it's sitting still, if it's watching television, if it's journaling, if it's reading a book.
Yeah.
You know what's funny right now, and you saying all that and me realizing like this is my own therapy right now. It's so I've really explored psychology a lot. Something I'm really interested in, mainly because of my own journey and trying to understand my brain and how it all works, and uncovering and understanding everything that's happened up until this point, but also with the athletes that I'm working with. But more recently I've started playing golf.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
So that's when you really know that you're old and it's time to stop sport, is when you start playing golf. And I'm realizing in listening to your story that I am right now attaching a lot of expectation on the performance of my rounds of golf. So like Thursday mornings is like my time to hang out with my friends, go play golf. We play in the morning, get back into in the afternoon. And it's become something that's consuming my mind so much right now. Wednesday night, terrible night's sleep every time. I'm just envisioning every shot going, like they're positive visualizations. I've even got a golf club in my office that I swing every morning just to like get the reps in. But I'm realizing now that I have gotten to my point without even calling myself out on it. And I'm placing, there's basically that I need to sit with this. I need to figure out what's driving me to think that I need to play well when I go out, and I need to hit a certain score. I need to play a certain way, and why I feel frustrated when I don't. And to be honest, like I'm already half aware of it. And the language I'm using around it when I talk to other people about it is like, oh, I'm just here for fun. Like score doesn't really matter. I'm out with my friends. The nature's beautiful. Like this is amazing anyway, regardless of score. But deep inside, I'm fucking pissed that I'm like, how are my scores getting worse? So anyway, again, vulnerability being self-therapy. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you for sharing your story, because that has just made me
Yeah.
think about mine and what I need to.
It's because you're competitive.
I think, yeah, that is it. But then
Mm.
it's like what channeling that competitiveness into
Yeah.
something that's actually, it's like at the end of the day, the score is not something I can control.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I have things that I can control, like my technique,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
mindset coming
Mm-hmm.
into a golf round, like what do I want to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
intentions. And I'm getting pulled out of that right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Anyway, good shit.
Yeah.
I need to
Just
think
to
about
bring it
this.
back to why you're doing it too. Like I sometimes I notice also I have like very, I mean, competitive tendencies. One of the things I really have start like during COVID was doing a lot of puzzles. Like I felt like, but I've like continued it. I just love puzzle. And
Doing
now
one
I
right
bring
now.
it, oh, amazing. I bring it to competitions as like kind of like the meditative piece, so I'm just checked out. I'm just solely focused on finding the pieces. But at some points I was like, oh my gosh, it's 2 a.m. and
Yeah.
I'm just obsessed with the puzzle. And I was like, okay, bring it back to, why I'm doing it. And like, okay, competition in swimming doesn't have to be competitive in puzzles, but yeah.
I can totally resonate with that,
Yeah.
because we're doing
Yeah.
a jigsaw right now. And I'm very stringent with my cutoff times of bed.
Yeah.
And like last night I was like, just one more
Yeah.
piece. And I actually said to my wife, I was like, you understand the dopamine hit that we're getting
Yeah.
every time we slot one piece in?
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't have that much of that
Yes.
shit to give at the end of the day. Like I need to be careful about how much of the jigsaw I'm
Yeah.
actually doing.
Yeah.
And also we have it on the floor. It's not cool.
Oh,
I'm like literally
bad for,
slouched
yeah.
over like for like an hour.
Hmm.
Anyhow, it's cool to hear that you are also a
Yes.
jigsaw person. Okay, you're starting to share a bit about like mindset,
Yes.
and that this is obviously, you've studied psychology as well,
Hmm.
so you've probably got a lot of knowledge and understanding as to what's actually happening, and using yourself as your own guinea pig. What have been some of the challenge? I kind of thinking about like your first Olympics, perhaps, or the
Hmm.
second Olympics. Like what are some of the thoughts that you personally maybe more struggle with? Maybe some of the reoccurring thoughts that come into your mind as you're leading up into Olympics. And I know that's a big time frame. That's
Yeah.
4 years potentially. But what have been some of the things that you have struggled with or wrestled with, or maybe in a place now where you feel like you've developed a lot of tools to help you combat the thing?
Hmm. I think I touched upon it a little bit earlier, but comparison, like to my past selves, and I think a lot of the times very worried about like how other people think of me and like what they perceive me, what they say about me. And I think feeling quite insecure about that. So in swimming, to qualify for an Olympics, you have to get like an A standard, and then it's kind of like you're automatically, two people from every country can automatically qualify. And then after that, it's like B standards. And then you can also be a relay only swimmer. And so, you know, I went to my first Olympics as an A cut swimmer. Like I qualified, I got there,
That means you're in.
I'm in.
Okay,
Like,
gotcha. And
yes.
is a B, it's like the best, if you're the best of the B bunch, you get an invitation.
So
Is that how
after
it
all
works?
the A people across every country have qualified, then if there's enough quota, and then there's universality positions, so for other countries that don't have,
Right.
they're allowed one male and one female.
Gotcha.
And then they go to, if there's enough quota, then they go, or I think maybe then it's relay swimmers, and then if there's enough quota, then they look at
The best of the
the
Bs.
B.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So nowadays with swimming, it's usually like A cut and then universality and relays. B, I think it's a bit more rare. It's just gone so fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, my first Olympics, I was an A cut swimmer, qualified, and it was also I was part of the first batch of girls that were like ever in the history of Hong Kong that qualified for the Olympics with an A cut. So, it's something that I was really proud of. And in Tokyo, I was a relay only swimmer. And, even in the name, like it's actually relay only swimmer, I felt like, oh, I'm only a relay a relay swimmer. And I really had a hard time, like it felt like a downgrade a little bit, you know? And I felt also like, oh, well, I'm still going to the Olympics, so I can't really complain. You know, I felt very kind of, it was like probably like I was trapped like myself. And I really had a hard time feeling like deserving to go to the Olympics. I was like, if I didn't qualify myself, like I shouldn't go. And I really struggled with that and feeling like I deserved that I belonged there. So very different, like I belong there kind of scenario, but the same kind of feelings.
Mm.
And I think that's when I really started to kind of reflect and I was like, okay, look at where you are right now. You know, you're older. It was a COVID year, so a lot of things shifted. Um, you know, it impacted your training, you know, things in my personal life. You know, in a way, when I was at the Rio Olympics, there were a lot of things I didn't have to think about. You know, I was still quite young and it was like college and school or it was college and swimming. And then 5 years later, you know, being a professional athlete and all of that that comes with and just other things. And I think when I put it into perspective, then I was really harsh on myself. Like, don't make excuses, you know,
Mm.
don't, you know, like you just didn't. And so I think a lot of it was just like really negative self-talk. Um, and I think I remember because I journal a lot and in Tokyo, I wrote myself a letter like the day before my race. And because I thought that that would be my last one. And I was like, okay, what do I want to tell myself? Like, you know, maybe in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, whatever. Or, you know, in the future, if I have kids, what would I want to tell them? And I wrote that, you know, it's not about the times and the rankings and that's important. Like, I'm proud of the person that I am and my character and my growth. And I think sometimes, you know, it's really hard when you're surrounded all the time by like, you know, other Olympians all going for that same thing. It's like that's the norm that you kind of forget how special it is to be able to go to an Olympics. And that, you know, there's that quote, I'm probably not going to say it right, but going to the Olympics is not about like winning, right? It's about participating and it's all about the Olympic values. And I think sometimes people get so obsessed with the medals and the records and the times that they forget that it's just going is also very impressive. And even if I don't leave with a medal or a final swim, you know, it's, I think it doesn't take away from everything that I've done to get to that point. You know, sometimes you hear so many stories of athletes that, you know, were the medal contenders and then they just, that day something happens. And I don't feel like that should take away from their journey either. Um, so I think for this Olympics, you know, yes, there is still obviously that piece that really I want to swim well and I want to swim, you know, my fastest time and I'm competing against really myself. Um, and also this one being in Paris has a little special place in my heart because my mom is French and my in the last two Olympics, my family wasn't able to come watch. I mean, Tokyo, obviously nobody
Yeah.
came. Rio was a bit far. And so to think, okay, my family will get to watch me at this one and I have friends that are coming. So I think there's other reasons that like make this experience special. I feel like I've completely gone on a
Well, can I, do you, but do
yeah.
you find, I mean, it sounds like you've really, so you identified a lot of the negative self-talk.
Yes, yeah.
You built tools around that
Hmm.
to, I guess, in the moment, identify that you were
Yeah.
doing it, pull yourself out of
Yes.
that and bring it back to whatever the tool is to
Yeah.
help you be more
Yeah.
present or positive. But do you, despite all that work,
Yeah.
and now being able to say, you know, like that's no longer important, like it's about me, but do those thoughts still come back? Do they still creep into your mind?
Yes, definitely. And I think that's like it's a work in progress. And it's I think it's kind of, you know, especially if it's self-talk, it's like reframing my self-talk. What am I saying to myself? Um, you know, I think sometimes it's yeah, I have, you know, now a toolbox, I would say, and it's like, okay, I know that I'm aware of my I'm triggered. What do I need to like combat whatever it is? So I feel like those are still there. And yeah, it's still a work in progress, but I think I'm not, it's being proactive about it. Like, okay, this is not helping me. What do I need to work through it?
And I think the more that you're aware of it, the quicker you can catch
Yep.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have my own equivalents of all the things
Yeah.
you're talking about in other areas of my
Yeah.
life. And the more I journal about it, talk about it, share about it, it's not to say, and I think it's important to say that these thoughts may never go
Mm-hmm.
away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I genuinely think I want to have some form of body insecurity issue until the day that I die. And as much as that relationship has changed so much since a 14-year-old kid who
Mm-hmm.
started lifting weights because he hated being small,
Mm-hmm.
to where I am now and like loving it as a means of like health and
Mm-hmm.
longevity. I still get every now
Mm-hmm.
and then that like 14-year-old voice still creeps in
Mm-hmm.
and says like, you're not big enough. You need to go back to the gym and do more.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm much better now at being able to just recognize it
Yep.
a lot faster.
Yeah.
Sometimes, maybe just a few years ago, it would drag on for weeks and
Yeah.
weeks and just be
Yeah.
this like quiet voice I wouldn't really recognize as there. But the voice is triggering me and it's
Mm-hmm.
making me do things and say things and act in a way that
Yeah.
I almost didn't have control of.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I could recognize it pretty quickly and be like, okay, take a deep breath. What do I
Mm-hmm.
want? What do I want to do about this? Do I want to do the same thing that I've always done and allow this to still be a part of me and my identity, or do I use the tools to try and break away from it? Because
Yeah.
we only create those toolbox because we understand that this is something that we don't
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to be a part of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a conscious choice that
Yeah.
we need to make. But then I think what I'm trying to say is that it's okay to know that this might be a part of you
Yeah.
forever,
Yeah.
and don't expect it to potentially just disappear and for it
Yeah.
to never be a problem again, or to feel demotivated when you've done all the work,
Mm-hmm.
yet the same thing keeps on creeping back because you just need, it's a part of us in many ways.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think one thing that has helped me a lot is I feel like I'm very self-critical and very hard on myself. And I remember one time my therapist asked me like, well, if you met you, what would you say to yourself? And I think like, oh, well, obviously I would celebrate the person and I would be like, oh, they're being way too hard on themselves. So sometimes it's really trying to be like, okay, what advice would you give your like what advice would I give myself?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite interesting too because I studied also sport and performance psychology because I was like, oh, maybe one day I'd want to be like a sports and performance psychology coach. So not like technical with swimming, but really interested in tapping into the power of the mind. And I think maybe like me experiencing all of this is just going to help other people. And I think for you, you're a coach as well, like all of these things and you're adding to your toolbox as well. And then I'm sure it resonates with a lot of your athletes that you coach, to give them like guidance as well.
Yeah. On the coaching part, I just think it's especially in CrossFit. I mean, like swimming, primarily a physical
Mm-hmm.
demand on the body. CrossFit, especially because there's so many things you're trying to get good at. You need to be good at everything.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And it's like, people pour so much energy into learning the skills and
Mm-hmm.
developing the strength qualities and just developing the aerobic
Mm-hmm.
qualities. And then they all get to this level where on paper, the physical capabilities of each athlete is like, there's really nothing that separates them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure maybe swimming's the same. Like, there's nothing really that's separating the top 500 in the world. But why are the top 50 always making it?
Mm-hmm.
Why is the top 5 every year the same?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are those guys doing different? Guys
Mm-hmm.
and girls doing different that is allowing them to access this another level of performance when it really matters?
Mm-hmm.
And, again, like going back to my own journey as a rugby player, like there's so many moments from under sevens rugby
Mm-hmm.
up until playing in the Hong Kong stadium that I can still remember. Like, I literally burned into my memory of like moments of performance anxiety or like a thought that happened in a moment and it led to
Mm-hmm.
something not good
Yeah.
happening. And it's like those things are there. And it was like, I knew myself that I was like, I don't think I really accessed the highest level of performance in the way that you spoke about
Mm-hmm.
yours as well, because my mind
Yeah.
held me back.
Yeah.
I also have like a lot of memories of like just these flow state
Yeah.
performances where like you're not thinking about anything and everything is just
Yeah.
working perfectly.
Yeah.
So I have those to rely on as well. But you know, in my own journey, it was like, I wish I knew about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I wish like someone had, and it's not to say I didn't have mentors, because I had a sports psychologist
Yeah.
as a rugby player who tried to help me, and
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't get it. I was like,
Yeah.
I don't understand how this is going to help me, and it kind of just then didn't take that opportunity that was
Yeah.
presented to me. But now, just knowing how important it is,
Mm-hmm.
and I really love your quote, which is like happy
Happy,
people make
happy swimmer, fast swimmer. But I
happy
think you
fa
could
it's the same. We always
same.
say, we
Yeah.
say like, good people make great athletes,
Mm.
or,
Yeah.
like happy people make happy
Yeah.
athletes. It's so true. And like happiness, when you really dig into it, is so, in most cases, so not attached to the actual physical thing that
Mm-hmm.
you're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know where I'm going on that
Yeah.
tangent now as well, but I guess it's like once you start exploring, once you take the lid off and you start looking into the jar,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the journey is never ending then.
Yep. Yes.
There's never a point where you've reached
No.
whatever the word is that we're going to fill in here.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing journey of just, I guess it just makes you feel like you're in control of your life a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
I experienced.
Yeah.
Whereas before I felt like I was very not in control of my life
Mm-hmm.
because everything was someone else's fault or something
Yeah.
else's fault or something that I couldn't do anything about, or
Yeah.
this is just the way that I am. What can I do about it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very liberating feeling.
Yep. Yeah.
Um, I wanted to talk about mind the waves a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, now I think having spoken to you a bit more,
Mm-hmm.
and mental health and mindset being such a
Yeah.
prominent thing that I think that you think about, which by the way is really refreshing to hear,
Mm.
because I always think there's so many amazing athletes out there who I think don't think anywhere near to the level
Mm-hmm.
that you are thinking
Yeah,
right
well,
now.
I overthink a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a blessing, and it can be a
Yeah.
blessing and a curse,
Yeah.
right? It's an amazing tool when it's an amazing thing to do when you have the tools to be
Mm-hmm.
able to manage it, but sometimes it's better just to not think about
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
which I think a lot of people make very successful careers for a very, very
Yeah.
long periods of time doing. But I think now, and seeing what Mind the Waves are doing, I've really, really only had a look through social media
Mm-hmm.
and the conversations you guys are having, the events that you guys are doing, and the people that you have behind it. But now I'm like, okay, this totally makes sense. I can see why this is
Mm-hmm.
something you're getting behind.
Yeah.
And I can see why maybe you're at a position in your career where you're not sure how much longer you're going to do this for.
Mm-hmm.
And you're passing on all the lessons that you're learning
Yeah.
to other
Yeah.
people. But what was the reason behind Mind the Waves? Maybe just tell us a little bit about Mind the Waves as well.
Yeah. So last weekend it was officially it's now officially a charity.
Nice.
So there's a lot of
Congratulations.
like behind the scenes work that needed to be done to make that happen. So we're really excited about that. For me, I think the idea really started in 2016, like when I came back to Hong
Wow.
Kong, and I was just like, nobody's talking about mental health. No, like the word psychology is very scary to people. Nobody's paying attention to mindset. And I think a lot of it came from my own personal experiences in Hong Kong. I was just like, well, how am I supposed to train every single day and have no break? I need like a mental break, and just a lot of different experiences. And I realized too, as I was doing a lot more, like clinics, talks, a lot of the questions people were asking me, like at the end of, these sessions or the Q&A, it was never about like, how do I be a better, like faster swimmer? It was always like, how do I deal with motivation? How do I deal with pressure? How do I deal with stress? And I was like, okay, so many people keep asking me these questions, so there's no answer out there for them. And, then I studied psychology. I was like, I don't have all the answers either. And I don't think I do have all the answers, but I think the biggest thing I've realized is there's so much stigma around and lack of education and awareness around mental health mental well-being and what that means. Like people still think, oh, I have a problem, but everyone is on, has a mental health, and you have your good days, not so good days. And I it all started, like, Mind the Waves actually started at the Tokyo Olympics, where I had a conversation, it was the end of the meet for us with two of my teammates. And we've been teammates for maybe, 8, 10 years. And in this moment, it was very much like we don't know what's next at that point. And so we were all talking and sharing a lot of, like, being vulnerable, right? And we were all like, oh, we've been teammates for so long. Like, we don't know. How did we not know all these things? And at the same time, like, we're all struggling with very similar things. And if we're all struggling with this, I'm sure a lot of other people are struggling with this. And I think for me, it was like, I want to do something in this space. I don't know how it's going to evolve, but I would regret not doing something. And so, how we talked about earlier, like fear of failure, that's not so much my fear. Now it's like the fear of having regret. And so I was like, I want to start something as a passion project. Let's see where it goes. But I want it to be around mental health in Hong Kong, around the youth. Because my angle I've never really wanted to go on the treatment side of things, but always on the preventative side of things, because I think so many things are preventable. It's just, if you think about it in a physical context, like, if you don't feel good, you go to a doctor. If you prevent injury, you do prehab and all these things. But with mental health, people, it's like it's always when they're like at the end, like burning out, that they're like, oh, maybe I should do something. So with my teammates, we're like, okay, let's start something. And so that's how we started, and it's just kind of evolved. And what we've realized in our last year is that people don't necessarily always want the solution. They just really want, like, a safe space to be listened to have conversations. Because I think we're still at a point in Hong Kong where it's still around stigma, like destigmatizing this topic and being vulnerable, and having spaces where people can talk about it. And one of our big things is also to target, more local Cantonese speaking communities, because it's even more stigmatized. And so talking about it in Cantonese, I don't speak Cantonese, but Steph and Jamie do, and really engaging that. And, even I'm learning a lot also, just in Cantonese, you don't have the same language that you have in English. Like, it's either I'm happy or I'm not happy. There's not like the, all the emotions. There's not as much, I don't know how to describe it. But
language that basically
right,
fill in the spectrum between good and bad.
And so that's where we're at now. And a big thing too was, we're known as athletes, but we want our contribution to Hong Kong to be beyond the swimming pool. And if we can use our voices and our platforms to talk about something we're all passionate about, then that's kind of what we've decided to do. And I think it's been well received so far. I mean, it's been challenging trying to balance it with swimming full time right now. But when, for example, last weekend, when they're like, oh, you guys are officially a charity, like, those are like the small wins that you're like, okay, it's all worth it. So yeah, that's something that also, you were talking earlier about the transition from athlete to coaching, and how you just knew that you were really passionate about coaching. I think sometimes something that I've really struggled with thinking about, and maybe sometimes why I've held on to swimming, was just like, I don't know what I want to do next. And I feel like I'm so lucky that I found something that I loved, but I found it very, very young. And so, I can't just retire now and, like, not do anything. So then I was like, and so there was this comparison of, I have to feel just as passionate about whatever I do next as I am about swimming. And I'm like, how am I going to find that? And so for so long, I was like, if it's not the same, I don't even want to, like, entertain it. And I think with with psychology and the mental health space, like, over the years, it's it's, it's stuck around. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'm really passionate about this. And so I feel, and then also obviously telling myself like, I've been swimming for a long time. It's not like overnight that all these things happen. And so it takes time to grow and build. And so this is something that I really do think, like, at least for now, I'm really passionate about. And, channeling the other energy that I have into this has been really rewarding. And just kind of excited to see where it continues to go.
Okay, I want to. I'm gonna make sure I don't forget this. I'm just gonna
Yes.
put this out there.
Yeah.
But you've hinted a lot already about like life after swimming,
Yes.
and okay, I'm starting to see some links now. We're gonna come back to that in one
Yeah.
second. But obviously, like this is a big year for you, right? The Paris Olympics. You've got
Yeah.
how long now?
Oh, I don't even know. Like, it's in end of July.
Okay,
Where May? Yeah.
So not that long.
Yeah.
You're from seeing. I mean, we did an event together.
Yep.
That you and Steph, who's also been in the podcast, Steph Camille, did an amazing job. Again, like everything around the things that we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
With the Lululemon community. And seeing you on social media, it looks like you're doing a lot.
Yeah.
Like there is, like you're flying Hong Kong to Beijing, back to your old schools. You're doing like public speaking events. You're on panels. At any point, are you thinking, okay, I guess, okay, I think I know the motivator behind it all now that you shared like how passionate you feel about all this, and this is something that you feel very strongly about. But, and then maybe I'm thinking back to like the idea of balance that you're trying to instill in your life, that it's important that you have this stuff as well. But at any point, are you feeling like this might be all these engagements, all this charity work, and your potentially your final Olympics? That's only a couple months away. Is there any part of you that's like, should I be doing all this? I don't know. Is that
for
a thought
sure
that you think about?
I had this thought literally yesterday
When you're about to come on the podcast.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god, no.
Is it too late to tell Ed?
I think it's so it's, as you were saying, it's the balance. I think for me, one of the things that I've like that keeps reoccurring is just like, I feel like I can do everything until I'm like, oh, I'm burnt out. I can't, and I have to like cancel things for, a week. And I'm like, I need to recover. And so a big thing for me is like learning how to say no. And I think sometimes there was this fear that like the opportunity is now. It'll never come back again. Like I just had this thought, like if somebody wants to do this now, they can't wait. And I was like, I have to do it now. And I realized like, and somebody once said like, for example, when I was saying like, we have to do this now with Mind the Waves, people were like, well, people will still care about mental health in 4 months, And so I think for me, it's finding that balance, because I think in the last few years, the recognition athletes get has changed. But before, people were really, I would say, majority were really very interested in us like around these big events, the Olympics, Asian Games, right? And then the other off periods, it was a bit quieter. And I think there's a part of me that is like, if I have things that I want to share and now there's a bit more of a spotlight, then I should leverage that and talk about these things, because, it's not that people don't care after, but it's like, if people are talking about it now, I should be using this as an opportunity to talk about these things too. But as you said, obviously the focus and the priority is on my swimming. And so that's something that I'm like, okay, I need to balance it. What helps is like when I'm not in Hong Kong, right? Before this, I was 7 weeks in the US training. And so that's where, you're really head down, do the work. The last 2 weeks, being more open to doing these engagements. And then really after this week, it's just head down, focused. And I think too, it's also like my coach would talk about like a metaphoric well, and seeing people engaging with my community is also something that does bring me a lot of joy and like makes me happy. So it is about finding that balance. I would probably overdid it a little bit if I'm being honest, but I think like we were saying, now I have the tools and I'm like, okay, no. And I think most people understand if I'm like, I'm really sorry, I need to be focused on the Olympics. They're not going to hold that against me if I say like, I can't go for coffee right now. But I think, it's about finding balance and using this time as opportunity to like talk about the things that I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you still have balance. It's maybe
Yeah.
not on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis
Yes.
right now, but you've got periods of
Mm-hmm.
time where you can be intensely focused on a thing, and then
Yeah.
this is a period where you're intensely focused on spreading the word of what you care a lot
Yeah.
about, connecting with people.
Yeah.
And then you're about to go in. So the balance it will recalibrate
Yes,
when you look at the
exactly.
year.
Yes.
Maybe not right now
Right
when you look
now.
at
Yeah.
the 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's really cool to see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about the identity one, because I think a
Yeah.
big part of this whole conversation has been around you and your identity.
Yeah.
And it will start at the very beginning of this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, which is like how you introduce yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a very quick chat last week, I think it was, at the Lululemon event,
Mm-hmm.
where you were just saying that this might be your last Olympics.
Yeah.
And you just said it just then, like thinking about what life might look like after
Mm-hmm.
is a little scary
Yeah.
for you right now. What is scary about like life after swimming?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really just the fact that you're not going to be a swimmer and you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
have that
Mm-hmm.
label, or is there other things that are attached to it as well?
Yeah. I think it's really hard because, in talking to a lot of people that have transitioned away from being not just a swimmer, but an athlete to not, everyone talks about how tough the transition is. So then I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, I think there were times where I'm like prolonging. I don't want to deal with whatever that's going to feel like.
Well, I'll address it when I get there, type
Yes,
thing.
exactly. And I think that's the thing, after my first Olympics was like, I don't feel ready to retire. Part of it was like, because it was buying time, and I was like, I'm good at swimming. Let's just stick with this for now. And so the last few years, well, 8 years now, it was like, okay, try to learn who you are outside of your sport so that at least when the time comes when you're ready to transition, you might not ever be ready, but you'll be more prepared.
Yeah.
And I think that's more of a confidence thing. Like, I don't know necessarily what I'm going to do, but I feel like I have the skills and the tools now that whatever it is, like, I'll be okay. And also, like, just accepting that it'll probably have its really low moments and it'll be really hard, but a lot of people have done it. So I have people that I could go to, be like, I'm struggling with this, and asking for help. I think what's the hard thing is, and it's something more, in the last few years that I've really started to appreciate, is just being a professional athlete. Like I was saying, sometimes it's so normalized because that's what I'm surrounded by, that like you kind of forget how cool it can be. And I think, when you're thinking like, oh, this may be the last this or the last that, you're like, it's so cool. I don't want it to end. And I just, I've had so many great things that have come from swimming, like the opportunities to visit so many countries and train overseas, so many people that I've met around the world, and all the friendships. We've talked a lot about personal growth. And I think too, like lifestyle. Like I'm like, I don't know if I could do a corporate job and sit in an office from 9 to 5 or whatever. And so I think there's a lot of, it's not so much the identity piece that's like, like
Is it
that
the
I'll lose
purpose?
that, but maybe it's that. And, what am I going to do next? The enjoying doing something, like working towards something, when right now I don't know what that is, but I think there were in the past, like I would get so overwhelmed with like, what am I going to do, I need a plan, and I think now I'm like, well, if I trust that I'll figure it out, just wait and just really like be present in this moment. And, there's a few more months until the Olympics, like really just embracing every moment. And, every time I feel like I'm like, oh, future, I'm like, just bring it back. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the harder you look for something, the further away
Mhm.
it is.
Yeah.
Because I think about that
Yeah.
myself as well. which is I ask myself the question sometimes, since I've been doing, I think very similar to yourself, all this work around like, who am I?
Yeah.
You know, and if the label goes, if I'm no longer Ed the coach or
Yeah.
Ed the owner of Coastal Fitness or
Hmm.
whatever,
Yeah.
those are the two main
Yeah.
things. Actually, there's nothing else. But if they go,
Yeah.
like, am I going to be okay?
Hmm.
And I ask myself the question a lot, which is, and I think again, the pandemic was a massive
Hmm. Hmm.
teacher for me, I think, because I actually did almost lose my gym.
Mm.
And, you know, I was faced for the first time in 12 years, like the potential of this not being here.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to really sit and think, like, okay, if my gym disappeared tomorrow, if my Instagram account, if
Yeah.
Instagram collapsed tomorrow,
Yeah.
0 followers,
Mm.
everything I'd ever done on that thing gone, if my podcast got
Mm.
wiped, if, you know, and you can have all these other ifs for the things
Yeah.
in your life that you deem to be important to you that maybe you have attachment
Hmm.
to, or something very proud of that you'd like to talk about. If that goes, will I be okay?
Hmm.
And I can genuinely say I would be okay.
Mm.
It would be really sad
Yeah.
and it'd be gutting in a sense that I
Hmm.
wouldn't have the memories there of the things that I put a lot of my life and
Hmm.
put a lot of energy and time into. But I actually know I would be okay.
Mm.
And at some point in time, I would get back on my feet
Hmm.
and I would find my thing,
Yep.
because I just know that I have the character to be able to navigate hard times. And maybe that's come from doing sport and owning a
Hmm.
business and not being afraid to take on challenges. Again, like, you know, going back to what you were saying, which is like, why do you still do it?
Hmm.
It's like the ability to be resilient
Hmm.
that's come from doing hard things. I now know that if that all got taken away, that I would still be okay
Yep.
and it would all work itself out
Hmm.
at some point in time. And I can say that about a lot of other people I meet as
Hmm.
well. You know, there's just people you meet and they just know that it's like, this person, no matter what happens, is going to be okay.
Yep.
Like you just
Hmm.
get that feeling because
Hmm.
they've cultivated the skill sets and the mindset and the toolbox. And sometimes I actually think like maybe that would be a nice challenge one day.
Hmm.
As much as I love this so much now, and again, being present is that I'm just gonna keep on asking myself that
Hmm.
question, you know, every few months. Like, and I actually do this with a lot of areas in my life all the time, which is you kind of do a stock check of everything that I'm doing, whether it's my social life, it's my hobbies, my activities, my job, and things I have to do within my job. And I ask myself, like, is this really what I want to be doing? And I just
Hmm.
do that stock check every few months. And if the things that are not in alignment there,
Hmm.
I just build a plan to get those things out of my life. And sometimes they come back in, you know, but if I,
Yeah.
and I guess it's just the same. And sometimes I think I would probably enjoy doing nothing
Mm.
actually. You know,
Yep.
it's
Yeah.
like I really have been such an A-type person my whole
Mm.
life. I rarely have more than a day where I'm not doing anything,
Yeah.
if even a day. And I just have become, I think this is another thing that I'm kind of wrestling with right now, and I
Hmm.
have been for the last couple of years, which is like,
Yeah.
why do I do the hard? I mean, we've been talking this whole episode about like why doing hard shit's important,
Yeah.
but sometimes I'm like, why
Yep.
do I actually
Yeah.
do I need all that hard shit?
Yeah.
And like, when is enough enough?
Hmm.
I think that's a question I ask myself a lot.
Yeah.
It was, you know, maybe it was training and sport before, but now it's maybe business and the gym and,
Hmm.
you know, our mission of impacting lives. It's like, when is enough enough?
Mm.
I don't know. And where is that like burning desire to keep on doing the next thing? You know, it's
Hmm.
like when one project finishes, it's like
Yep.
a day has hardly gone by and it's like, okay, what's next?
Yep. Oh my God. I relate so much to everything you just said, really. And I feel like I'm like, for me, exactly. It was like, okay, Olympics, what's next? Master's degree, what's next? Next Olympics. And I just never had the time to like breathe. And honestly, I remember somebody once told me, it was like, if you do nothing the rest of your life, you are still enough. And I really was like, am I? And I like started to ask myself all these questions. And I think that's why, you were asking, I don't know if it was before we started, but about like what am I most proud of is like, I like the person that I am today. And, you know, not attaching to all the things like the identities of swimmer or whatever, co-founder. It's the same thing. I think like I trust that I'll be okay or that I'll figure it out. And, you know, if anything, I'll learn something from it. And actually, as you were talking, it really made me think of, you know, of like when you were saying like do nothing, people always tell me like you're always doing too much, like do less. And I, in the last few years, I spent a lot of time alone. Like I just was like, you know, it's too much. I just need to kind of take a break. And I did a lot of like solo traveling, and I could really feel like in the first few days, I was like, what am I going to do? And like almost like I need an itinerary. Like, okay, I'm going to wake up, do this and do that. And then I was just like, I was, you know, and like actually sitting with yourself and like kind of being bored. I was just like, I don't know what to do with this. And then like towards the end of the trips, I would always feel so like calm and rested and like very just content, you know? And I think that's something that I've really tried to integrate more, is just like finding those pockets really to like do nothing. And but it can be very hard sometimes.
I'm exactly the same. And actually now when it's time to be still, you know,
Yeah.
and like you, I think I carve out time
Yeah.
in my day,
Yeah.
even if it's 5 minutes to do some breaths,
Yeah.
which I did before this podcast, or it's a 10-minute walk without my phone. I always find that it's a telltale sign if in that 5 minutes and 10 minutes I'm struggling with
Yep.
stillness, that it's like, okay, you're struggling with this right now because you haven't
Yeah.
given yourself the stillness and the time. And you know, like you said, at the end of lots of stillness is easy.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable when we get so addicted to being busy.
Yeah.
That stillness, which is so opposing, becomes really uncomfortable. And I mean, when I used to think about, even hear the word meditation,
Yeah.
I would like laugh.
Yeah.
I'd like, and I would feebly try and be like, this is just not for me. It was so uncomfortable to do it. And now it's kind of my measure. It's like my measuring stick is to like, what is my well-being like right now? And if I can sit there, close my eyes or have my eyes open, just be present, and it's easy, I'm like, okay, this is good. This is, you know, things are in check right now.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I need a bit of stillness right now. And sometimes it's just like on my calendar being like, just nothing today, you know, and just see where the day takes you.
Camille, we have one last question that we ask every guest that comes on this show. It's an easy question. I think it's an easy question. So the question is, describe your perfect day.
Oh, good question. Well, first of all, the perfect day would be a sunny day. I would probably have like a 4-hour breakfast. As in just like
slow,
sit.
4 hours.
No, not eating for 4 hours, but just like at a coffee shop, you know, with breakfast, coffee or a matcha.
You're going out for breakfast.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And somewhere like outdoorsy, maybe. So I guess like in Hong Kong, I would probably say like either somewhere like Sheko or Saikong, like in nature. And then, I don't know what else. Probably just see a few friends. It's just being outside. So everyone's like, oh, but you're a swimmer. Don't you get bored of being by the water? I'm like, no. So swimming pool and the ocean, very different. So I would say that. Yeah, very simple, but that would make me, it's actually my birthday tomorrow, and that's what I want to do.
Happy birthday for tomorrow.
Thank you. So I'm like, I asked myself that exact question. I was like, okay, tomorrow, I mean, obviously I have to swim, so we have to add that in there, but I have the morning off, so that's what I'm going to do.
So swimming doesn't feature in your perfect day. Being by the water does?
Yes.
Gotcha. And you don't eat lunch, dinner. That's interesting.
No, I do, but I don't know. That's
details.
Yeah. A good night's sleep. I mean, I guess a perfect training day. That's a very different question.
Very different question.
But yeah, I mean, a good training day would be, you know, 2 sessions, either gym or Pilates, and then a swim, a nap, like a little baby.
Out of curiosity, how many
Yeah.
hours are you sleeping a night?
I try to do 10 to 7, like 10 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, 9 hours.
Yeah. But it's rarely I can hit that because I have sometimes
Are you in
trouble.
bed for 9 hours? Are you asleep for
Depends on
nine
the
hours?
day,
Mm.
but I try to have that.
Are you a good sleeper?
No.
Always been a bad sleeper?
I'd probably say I struggled with it after Rio. I like really struggled with like insomnia. I think a lot of like anxiety and a lot of overthinking. And then sometimes if we have really hard sets, like I have a hard time. I mean, I'm sure you like,
Bring
like
yourself
bringing
back into
yourself
a
back. Yeah.
parasympathetic state.
And then I discovered caffeine at 23, and then I was like, oh no. And I know you have a very, like, you stop very early, but I
Yeah,
don't. I maybe at like 2 p.m. I'll still have coffee, so that probably doesn't help.
yeah.
Yep.
Worth experimenting with.
Yeah.
Camille, this has been an absolute pleasure. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, but actually, I've learned a lot more about you. You are clearly really, really passionate about the things that you're doing outside of swimming, of course, swimming as well.
Mhm.
And you're not just talking about it, you're actually doing a lot of really great things through your social media platforms, through Mind the Waves. And it seems like you're just partnering with as many people who are kind of in the same on the same wavelength as you right now, and it's really cool to see all the impact that you're having. And of course, good luck in Paris if that all goes ahead, which I'm sure it will. I'm sure you're gonna have loads of fans cheering you on regardless of the result. I just want to say, for me, I think it's an amazing thing. I mean, one Asian Games or one Olympics alone is, you are 0.0000001% of the population who get to go there, but to do it 3 times is really amazing. And I think to hear the why behind what's driving you to do it now has given me a whole new perspective of you. And I think there's potentially a lot of other athletes who are doing what you're doing. So yeah, really cool conversation. And thank you so much for sharing everything.
Oh, thank you so much. I just want to say that it's been really, really refreshing speaking to you about it. I feel like, especially with men and talking, like being vulnerable and talking about mental health, it's very rare to find people who are so open. So I've really loved this conversation, and I want to have more conversations. And also just having you at our event 2 weeks ago, everyone loved having you there too. So thank you for what
It's a
you do.
pleasure. Thank you very much. And we will have more
Yes.
conversations.
Great.